Do you remember this app that we built while learning about handling multiple event listeners? So here in this app, we have event listener on each of these boxes with different background. And when we perform an event like click and our shift key is pressed, we can see the text and the background here in the corner changes to that specific color. If we click on blue, we can see the text changed to dark blue and the background changed to that respective color. In our previous video, we also learned about the nature of event that is called event bubbling. And how it works is like if event happens on div with class box, it bubbles out to the parent that is div with class button and to the parent that is body until it reaches the HTML of the page. Let's go ahead and see event bubbling in action. So whenever the event is happening on any of these boxes, what happens is it bubbles out to the div with class buttons and body and to the HTML. But we are not listening to those events happening on these three elements. So let's go ahead and add an event listener on buttons. So here in our element, we can see we have selected the root element by selecting a class of buttons, that is this div with class of buttons. So we are adding an event listener on root element of type click. Whenever that happens, call this function called handle event. As soon as it will bubble out from here, it will go on to body and to HTML. Because of that, we are adding event listener to document.body and document. So now we are listening to the event on this element, and this element. So in that way, what will happen, now event happens on the boxes, it will log the message that is event.target. Let's see. So when we click on the box, we can see the message fired 3 times. And the reason it fired 3 times is because the event happened here on the boxes. It will bubble out to the parent that is div of class button, and we are listening for that event here. Similarly, it will bubble out to body and we are listening for that event here. And it will bubble out to HTML and we are listening for that event here. What if we go ahead and comment out document.body and document events? We'll see the message will console only once. And that is exactly what is happening here. Now, after understanding the concept of event bubbling, let's try to use this for some of our benefits. So I'll go ahead and delete this thing. So here what we are doing is like, say for example, we have 100 boxes. So we are adding 100 event listeners on each of the boxes. And that is a lot of event to handle. Say in future, if we have million number of colors, then this will become really intense because the number of events will be a lot. So to handle that, let's go ahead and comment it out. And instead of listening to the event on each of the element, that is div with class box, we'll listen for the event on buttons for now, because we know that event happening on any of these boxes will bubble out to this element. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll say root dot add event listener, and we're listening for the event of type click. And when that happens, I want to call a function called handle event. We'll go ahead, create another function called handle event that will get access to an object called event object, and will console log event.target with a message saying event, just for an indicator. Now if we refresh it, let's go ahead and click on any of the boxes. We know that now we are not listening for the event on the boxes, we are listening for the event on the parent of the box. So when the event happens, because of event bubbling, it will go on to the parent and we can see the message here. In this way, what happens, the event happening on any of the boxes, we can listen to those events by listening to the parent. So this concept of listening for the event on the parent instead of listening on the children is called event delegation. You delegate the event instead of yourself to your parents. So let's see how we will make this application work by using event delegation. So we have removed the event listener from each individual cards Now we are listening to the event only once on the parent. And when that happens, we can see we get access to the element here. Now let's try to perform the event on two of the boxes. So here I'm clicking on one of the boxes. This is the second box. So looking at all these three boxes, we can understand, is there any difference between all these three boxes? The difference is only in terms of whatever is the background color, that is dark red, margarita and maroon. So using this, we can get access to those values and then we can pass that value to this element and change that. Let's go ahead and try to log that value. To access this value, we can just go ahead and say event.target.style.background color and see if we are able to log that message or not. So when we click on this, we are getting access to this value because we have access to the color, and we can change the h1.innerText by using this. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll go ahead and store this event.target.style.background color in a variable called color, and once that is done, we have access to h1 element, and we'll go ahead and say innerText should be equal to color. Along with that, we also need to do another thing, that is h1.style.background color should be to that specific color. So we'll say color and now refresh it, and we can see the app is working properly for us. But the benefit here we can see is, like, instead of having 100 event listener for 100 boxes, we just have one event listener on the parent, and in that way it becomes a lot more easier to deal with these scenarios. Even the performance of the app becomes really good. But one problem is there is we cannot rely on background color. This is not the right way of doing things. So there is a thing in HTML called data attributes. Let's try to explore that and solve the same problem in different way. Data attribute is adding an extra information to any of the element. Say, for example, here in all of these boxes, what if we want to add some extra information, something like class box. So class is a predefined attribute. I want to add a custom attribute that will contain some extra information. So to do that, to add some extra information, we'll use a method called setAttribute. So we'll say div.setAttribute. We have learned about this method earlier. What it does, it adds a new attribute or extra attribute to any of the elements. So I want to add an extra attribute that should be color, and the value of that will come from here, that is color. Press this page, we'll see that each of the boxes will contain an extra property that is color. But there is another problem with this approach is class and styles are predefined but color is not. It will confuse the developer. So in that way, the better way to go about it is using a thing called data attribute. So data attribute is a way to pass some extra information, and the only thing you have to do is to prepend the whole thing with a data hyphen. So in that way, it indicates the developer that this is a custom attribute, not a attribute that was defined from earlier, like ID or class or something like that. So instead of saying color, we should just say data hyphen color. It's a custom attribute added by the user just to get some extra information. If we refresh it, we'll just have something called data hyphen color. So whenever you are passing some extra custom attribute from your side, you should always prepend it with data hyphen. So we have added an extra attribute that is called data hyphen color with the value of color, so we don't have to access it in this way. And let's go ahead and log the event.target. But this time we are going to say console.dir and we'll say event.target. Now if we refresh this page, go into our console and click on any other box, we'll say we clicked on div of box. And let's try to find out where this property lives, because everything that you add, like say think about for class, it lives somewhere in the object. So every HTML attribute will stay somewhere in the DOM object. Class name stays here. Even the data attribute will stay somewhere here. So as we are scrolling here, we can see that in dataset there is a property called color that is deep sky blue. So it means that the dataset property of the DOM object contains everything that you're passing in data attributes. Anything prepended with data hyphen will come onto dataset. So to access this element, we'll go ahead and we'll say event.target. Target has a property called dataset and it is an object. And in that object, we need to access the property called color. Now if we refresh it, what I'm logging right now, let's go ahead and say console.log event.target, that is the box. The box has extra property called data-color that will go into a special property dataset. That is an object that contains a key of color. Let's go ahead and click on anything. And we can see clicking on all these boxes is giving us access to some extra information that we added using data attributes. So instead of using background color like this, we will be using data attributes. Now let's remove it and refresh the app, and we can see the app started working exactly how it was. So in this app now we have used two concepts. The first concept that we used called event delegation. Event delegation is a strategy that we can use to optimize the performance of the web app. And we optimize the performance by listening to the event on the parent element instead of listening to the event on 1,000 different children elements. So in that way, we only have one event listener other than having 1,000 event listeners. The second property that we use is called data attributes. So data attribute is a way to provide some extra information to any of the element, and the rule for that is to prepend the attribute with data hyphen. And to access that property, we have to go into dataset property of the DOM element and access the name that we've passed. So in this way, we learned about event delegation and data attributes.